Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, which was named by Poets and Writers a best book for writers. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. And follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, and I'm so happy to have Sue William Silverman with us today, who has written this book called Selected Misdemeanors, Essays at the Mercy of the Reader. Let me tell you a little bit about Sue. Sue William Silverman is an award-winning author of 9 works of nonfiction and poetry. Her new book, Selected Misdemeanors, Essays at the Mercy of the Reader, is a collection of flash essays. Her book on the craft of writing, Acetylene Torch Songs, Writing True Stories to Ignite the Soul, won the 2024 IPPY Silver Award. Her memoir-in-essays collection, How to Survive Death and Other Inconveniences, won the Gold Star in Foreword Reviews INDIE Book of the Year Award and the Clara Johnson Award for Women's Literature. Other works include Lovesick, One Woman's Journey Through Sexual Addiction, made into a Lifetime TV movie, Because I Remember Terror Father, I Remember You, which won the AWP Award, the Pat Boone Fan Club, My Life as a White Anglo-Saxon Jew, and Fearless Confessions, A Writer's Guide to Memoir. She's co-chair of the MFA in Writing program at Vermont College of Fine Arts, and her media appearances include The View, Anderson Cooper, 360, and PBS Books. This is a fascinating expose in all the permutations and the things that you've done in your life that kind of make you who you are. So let's start at the very beginning. What was the spark or the impetus that led you to write Selected Misdemeanors? Because you've written about your life in other ways and in other memoirs.
Yeah, which is actually what did bring me to Selected Misdemeanors, because Selected Misdemeanors is a collection of flash essays, which means they're very short. And so I've written 2 full-length memoirs, 250 pages or whatever. I've written 2 memoir and essay form, which are personal essays, which are long essays. And as a writer, I really just needed to push myself. I needed to grow. I wanted to try something that I'd never done before. And I've actually always found the short form very difficult. Like I always thought, oh God, I need 1,000 pages to say what I need to say. Just a lot. And so for me, I really did want a new challenge. And the essay, I've written a few, and it's got the whole form, the whole genre of flash fiction has gotten a lot of sort of publicity of late. And I thought, well, other people are writing it. Let me try it as well. And so I did it as a challenge to myself. I just wanted to see if I could do it. And I think I did it.
Yeah, and you use photos. You characterize yourself as Miss Demeanor, Miss Miss Demeanor. And I'm trying to pull up one of the photos. I flagged a few of them. Here's one.
Yeah, so each photo is actually, it's a photo essay. So the photo itself doesn't exactly reflect back to one of the essays that I've written in the book. It's an essay unto itself. So it has a title, and then each photo has like a 3-line text. So they are photo essays. And then I also have a series of postcards that I use. And the postcards, as well as the photo essays, are kind of also devices. Yeah, that's a postcard.
Dear future me. That's
Right,
the ones.
right.
Yes.
And they're meant to be sort of kind of through threads to sort of help hold the whole collection together. So the photo essays and the postcards are kind of sprinkled throughout the book.
There's a photo essay, and I like them because they're different and you don't see those usually. And you did one about your addiction, and it was talking about, I think I see you, and then I see you, I with the C, and then you, like the word.
Yeah,
Can you
intensive
talk a
care.
little bit about that one?
Yes. So this photograph, it was taken in one of those carnival booth things. So where you get like 5 shots or 5 photos for a quarter or something like that. And it's on page 80. So this is it, if people can see it.
This
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, exactly. I've had the essay since high school, but I never really thought about it much one way or the other. And then when I was writing this book and I was looking for some photos that would sort of fit, I looked at the photo again, and all of a sudden I looked at the expression in the eyes of me in high school. And I thought, oh my goodness, I never noticed the expression in these eyes. I mean, I sort of got goosebumps because I sort of see, I struggled for years as a sex addict. And these to me are the eyes of like this forming high school girl in sort of the initial phases of being a sex addict. It's just the expression on the eyes is it's sort of seductive. Like I'm all sort of seeing something for the first time. If you look at me in other pictures, I've never seen that expression before. So there was something really happening in this photo. And I thought, oh my goodness, I mean, it was sort of scary, but also very revelatory.
Yeah,
The,
read the title
yeah,
of it, and then the poem. Yeah.
right, right. So the title, so as Estelle said, I have sort of an alter ego in these photo essays, and I call myself Miss, Miss, and then the name is Demeanor. So Miss Demeanor considers the time she hid in a curtain photo booth at a carnival and produced a snapshot that captured for the first time the addict's false eyes, the innocently deceitful gaze of her true preclinical self. So that's the title. And then the text itself is Her Eyes See You, the I See You, the I See You. And of course, the last line, ICU, is the intensive care unit, which
Yeah.
means that, there's not going to be a good ending here, at least,
Yes.
initially down the pike, that she's going to end up in a place that's, scary and where she's not doing well. It's funny how you can look at a photo sort of on and off for years and not really see anything. But then when you're kind of looking like for something, and all of a sudden you see a photo in a completely new light. And that's what happened here. And I just found it so startling because the eyes, they are sort of seductive, which means that they are also false, which is what I mentioned in the title, because
Yeah.
it's not like the real me. And it is my preclinical self, it's before I got into rehab, before I got into therapy, all of that.
And we know a couple of things about you. I mean, even if we haven't read your other memoirs, page 3 at the Apollo Theater, St. Thomas, circa late 1950s, your first sentence is, my father sexually misloved me growing up, but that's another story. It's not like we're going to find something out. It's like we know that something happened. So that to me is like a preface for reading the rest of the pieces that you're writing, because we have that little bit of information and you don't go into it in depth, but it's enough to just center, I guess, the stories that come after.
Yeah, and obviously that was very deliberate, and it was to sort of give this context because, I've already written a lot about my father, and he appears briefly in some of
Yeah.
the other essays, but I don't have to rehash the whole thing that went on with my father. So
Right.
one sentence just offers context and motivation for all of the other essays, basically. So
Yeah. Like we understand, this is the genesis of the sex addict and the looking for older men. And you even say men who are, older like your father and that whole thing.
exactly.
And you talk more about him in different places and different connected to, I guess, items or things he's given you or things that are somewhat relevant to your family life. But you
Exactly.
don't go into detail except you talk about the night and your fears and things like that. And later you talk about the worm that you kind of had magical thinking about because you wanted to have some sort of protection. So it's really so visceral and so evocative. What does it mean to you that you said essays at the mercy of the reader? I want to understand that subhead a little bit.
Yeah, it is a sort of a strange subtitle, but it's kind of like me as narrator. So I have these selected misdemeanors. I just want to reassure everybody that my misdemeanors, I never ended up in jail. They aren't things that, I broke any big laws or anything like that. They're really emotional misdemeanors. So that's what the misdemeanors are, just to reassure everybody. But the subtitle, Essays at the Mercy of the Reader. So I did have all these misdemeanors, affairs,
Drug use.
yeah, a little bit of drug use, just inappropriate men hurting people. So I had these misdemeanors and I didn't want to be judged too harshly for them. So it's sort of like I, as narrator, I'm kind of throwing myself at your mercy. Like, please, if you read these essays, understand that, I'm not really a bad person. I just did these things, but there's a reason why, and I'm sorry. So it's sort of like I just am kind of throwing myself at the mercy of the reader. But I think in a way, too, it's sort of to try to get the reader engaged a little bit. So it's sort of asking you as reader, well, you judge. I mean, can you show me mercy? Or am I sort of so far gone? Nope, no mercy for Sue. As I say, the emotional misdemeanors about betrayals and love
Yes.
and trust and things like that. And just things like making really bad choices. For example,
Yes.
one essay, I lived in Galveston, Texas for a while on the Gulf Coast. And, there are a lot of sort of seedy Gulf Coast bars. And there was one night where my husband was out of town. I was alone, but I was drinking. And just, oh, I decided I think I'll get divorced. I mean, I don't know if you can exactly call that a misdemeanor, but it's a really bad decision to choose something like that when you are a little bit drunk.
And you talk about you had somebody you were having an affair with, and you did like a couple's night with you and your husband and him and his wife. And then later his wife finds you. And so that's pretty much an emotional
Yeah,
misdemeanor.
yeah. I mean, there are just a lot of them. And, the challenge was to try to be able to show these in a short form, but whereby the whole collection could sort of cohere around a common
Yeah.
theme. I mean, sort of the overall arc, the overall theme of it is that I, as narrator, I'm searching for home, like capital H, home, sense of comfort, security, stuff like that. So on the one hand, I'm searching for this home, but on the other hand, I'm kind of doing everything to sort of sabotage this. That's sort of the tension of the book that on the one hand, the narrator wants safety and security, but her behaviors are such that they just keep sabotaging her desire for this home. So it's a real sort of push-pull between what the narrator wants versus what her actions are kind of doing.
I want to ask you about two things. One, I want to ask you about the postcards, Dear Future Me, and like what the idea for you doing these was about. And then I want to talk to you about metaphor.
Okay, yeah. So the postcards, yeah, they're addressed to future me. And they're sort of to try to show kind of the two voices of creative nonfiction. There's like the unaware voice of who you are when something happens in the past, and then the more aware voice that can look back and sort of reflect on what that something is. So it's sort of trying to get this idea of this is the way I am now in this postcard, but they're somewhat slanted to sort of give like that more aware voice. So sort of trying to play with those two voices. The postcards are very short in these little segments of time.
Yes. Can you read the one on page 29?
Of course. Okay, so this is Dear Future Me. Another family vacation to suffer through. Oh man, I eat a ton of sugar and get sick as a dog. At the Sunday buffet, miles of food. I gorge on petit fours, eclairs, tartlets, meringues, macaroons, puff pastries. I pretty much lose it all about an hour later. Oh yeah, there's also a cool ice sculpture of a mermaid overlooking the feast. Sis, my sister, roams the shore. Dad swims in freezing water. Mom wants to hold us all together until her dreams melt away. Love, Sue.
Okay.
So here, the whole first part is that unaware voice. I'm just, it's kind of a little snarky and like another family vacation to suffer through. Oh man, all of that. So that's the sort of unaware voice, sort of telling it how I felt at the time. But then we have the ice sculpture, which again is just sort of a fact of what it was. But then the last line is sort of segues into metaphor. Mom wants to hold us all together until her dreams melt away, which of course speaks to this ice sculpture that is going to melt away, right? Just like the family dreams. So that would be the aware voice. At the time this happened, it was just an ice sculpture, right? Didn't think
Right.
about it. But now writing about it through the writing process, I, as the author, narrator, can think, oh, but that ice sculpture really is a metaphor for how, yes, in reality, the ice sculpture melts away, but the family dreams. Like we aren't this family that sort of presents itself to the outer world that so theoretically looks perfect, but all of this unhappiness is actually going on. So that's the use of metaphor there. And what those postcards are meant to be is to sort of show kind of these two voices all within this one postcard.
And so you did that with each postcard that you had the unaware voice. It started always with the unaware voice. Why don't we look at another one? Because this is really interesting how you crafted that. What would be another one?
On page 21,
Okay.
it's in the Berkshires and it's Dear Future Me. I sit on the shore of a lake. A small breeze ruffles the skin of water as I watch a baby bird fallen from its nest, unable to fly, float farther and farther from shore. Love, Sue. So again, this is like the unaware voice. It's just watching this bird who's floating farther from shore, who's fallen from its nest. But the fact that, at the time I wouldn't have said something like farther and farther from shore. That's a more adult observation, which of course is really talking about this whole piece is kind of a metaphor, even with the two voices, because it's a metaphor for me, for the narrator, who's floating farther and farther from shore, which is to say farther and farther from safety. Like the bird is not going to survive, poor bird. I still feel bad about it. And, the bird is just lost. But the narrator herself feels lost. Yeah, so the aware narrator can kind of craft this little moment in time. That's all I remember about the event. Just this little moment of time. So to craft it in such a way that the bird itself is a metaphor for the narrator who is, just floating farther and farther away from family, love, security, home, all of that. She's just going to be on her own and hope to survive.
I love that. And I also love it as a writing exercise. Like, if you were telling people how to do this, how would you tell them to do it, to start, to excavate, to pull it all together?
So basically, there's 71 essays in this book, and each one is more or less around an obsession. So first of all, just find your obsessions. There are lots of them, and the more obsessions you have, the better off you are as a writer, because we write our obsessions. And once you have an obsession, say like, this moment with this bird, how can you convey it in such a way that it's metaphorical, so that it sheds light on your interiority? Or another a really good example. So on the cover of the book is an upside down or belly up goldfish, right? And that's in one of the essays. So on the face of it is just a goldfish. The first draft or so, the goldfish was just a goldfish. So the backstory is that I have my first job. I'm just out of college and I have a boyfriend and he goes off to boot camp. It's the Vietnam War. He goes off to boot camp. So to sort of comfort myself for company, I get a goldfish. But yeah, there's a big but. I also have an affair with my boyfriend's roommate. And now, granted, my boyfriend isn't that loving, but I still should not have had an affair with his roommate. So what happened? So I have an affair with the roommate. The roommate breaks up with me. I'm so distraught, I forget to feed the goldfish. The goldfish dies. So those are two misdemeanors, the affair with the roommate, and then the goldfish that I allowed to die because I forgot to feed him. So those are two misdemeanors. However, the metaphor is now the goldfish. I find him, belly up in his little bowl. And now the goldfish becomes a metaphor, not just for death, but for sort of loss of love and, kind of betrayal because I betrayed the goldfish. And I did love my little goldfish, but I let him die. But it's also about my boyfriend himself isn't really loving. And then the roommate has an affair, but then he leaves me, which is a betrayal as well. Through this one image of a belly up goldfish, it's a metaphor for, betrayal, loss of love, just loss, period, just loss.
And it's also an objective correlative, right? Because that's the embodiment of the emotion of whatever you're dealing with in the relationship, in your own psyche, not taking care of yourself, not taking care of the goldfish. So back to how somebody could do it for themselves. Like, so write about your obsessions. Yes, definitely.
And then you find a sensory detail, an object that's within your environment. So within my environment here, I had this goldfish. So you have to be on the lookout. It's sort of counterintuitive, but you find an object, a sensory detail outside of yourself that you can describe in such a way that it casts light on your interiority. Because if I was just going to write sort of from the inside out, I would say, oh, well, I felt lost and I felt sad and I felt betrayed. But those are just very generic, abstract words, and a reader cannot feel an abstraction.
All right, I'm going to play a game with you. Let's say we're using a book as the metaphor, as the object. How would you work that in?
So I would focus on words probably, because words themselves are kind of metaphors. And so I think I would sort of focus on, I have this piece of paper with words on it, and the words are an attempt to shed light on myself as narrator. So I would just pick out certain evocative words and sort of describe the words in such a way that they could shed light on me. For example, the word bijou. I heard this word when I lived in the West Indies, and I was in a jewelry store, and the word itself means like small gem or something like that. So I love the sound of the word. I remembered it. And then when I was writing flash essays, this word came back to me, and I realized that, oh, a flash essay is like a little bijou. And so that's how you can take like even a word that's in a book or something and just describe this word in such a way that it can cast meaning on something. I mean, anything can be a metaphor, but what you have to do is describe it in such a way that it is revelatory. That's why like something as mundane really as a goldfish can be a metaphor.
So if you're saying like a beaded bracelet, right? So now you're maybe equating the beads to like putting something together in your life, or the color of the beads reflects the blue eyes of your lover or something like that.
Well, the thing about metaphor is that you can flip it. You want to describe the thing in a way that's going to fit the mood and the theme and how the narrator is feeling. Because let's say you could take this goldfish, and let's say I got this goldfish for company while my boyfriend was off at boot camp. He comes back and he proposes to me, and then I could describe like the sunlight coming through the window, flickering on this goldfish swimming around in his clean, crystal clear water. So that's the thing about these objects, is that they can go either way. It's almost like being a lawyer, how you could argue two sides of a case or something. I mean, any given object. So like this, granted, this is a plastic goldfish, but this goldfish, if it dies and it's belly up, then it's a metaphor for loss and, betrayal and stuff like that. If the goldfish is still swimming around happy and my boyfriend's come back and he asked me to marry him, then we have the sunlight glimmering on his little goldfish bowl and he's swimming around happy and all of that. So that's what you have to be aware of, is that anything can be a metaphor, but you choose how to describe it in a way that's going to fit the theme of the piece at hand and the way the narrator's
So I want to
feeling.
just play with this. Let's say I'm talking about a gold bracelet, right? And, it was shiny and new and given, right, and given to me, by somebody I loved. And I'm just making this up. And the person went into addiction. And over time, the bracelet became tarnished. And I found when I had it appraised, it wasn't really fully gold. It was something fake.
That's
And
right.
so now it's a metaphor for the relationship. So you go back and forth, right? You describe the item, which I like that. It's a very specific craft technique, describe the item. And then as things change within the relationship, yourself, the item's description changes. I think that's a
That's
very
right.
clear-cut way to define it.
That's exactly right.
In your author's note, you quote, I hope I'm saying it right, Susumu Tanegawa, a Nobel Prize winner in physiology, says that recalling a memory is not like playing a tape recorder. It's a creative process. And you're saying, this is the definition of creative nonfiction, reflects how I portray events contained in this book. And you preface it by saying others might recall or interpret events differently. I only claim my memories and how they evolved over the years as my own metaphoric truth, my own understanding. In short, I give you, dear reader, my most honest testimony. I love how you pulled the word testimony. I know you made a defined choice there. Testimony, misdemeanors, and it's also like throwing yourself on the mercy of the
Yeah,
reader.
the
It's like,
reader,
please,
right.
reader, this is my testimony. So I think
Yeah.
that's very clever. But it's very interesting because you are a literary writer. And so the creative process is paramount there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why with all of these, I mean, sometimes maybe I'll get the metaphor right away, but that's rare. Usually I have to have a rough draft of just sort of starting to get things down on paper. And then just as I revise, I just think, okay, what am I really saying here? And how can I say it? So I'm not just saying, okay, sort of like, okay, reader, this is what it all means, big sum up at the end, because you don't want that. And particularly in a flash piece, endings, I mean, all endings in anything are important. But in a flash piece, let's think about it for a second, because you don't have like 250 pages that you've spent.
Sue, can you define flash?
Sure. So the narrative is short, but revelatory. And so it's kind of an intense and focused look, really, at what it means to be human. And sometimes our initial feelings as a writer is to write like these big events, unhappy childhoods, an illness, something like that, a divorce. So that's the initial thing, is to think of these big events in our lives. But when you think about it, these big events, how much time do they really take? Because think about all the thousands and thousands and thousands of small little increments of time between these big events. What about those? Aren't those important? Well, I decided, yes, they really were important. So a flash is sort of like these small moments of beauty, kind of miniature moments of betrayal, snippets of loss, but you can do that all in this small, short form. And so in flash nonfiction, the exterior, the structure is small, but the interior is vast. And it's vast because of this use of metaphor, because a metaphor is universal, something that everybody can relate to. And that's why the outer form can be short, but it needs to be metaphorical, because the inside does need to be vast metaphorically, so that in that universality, a reader will be able to relate to my story.
Yeah.
And then the endings are really important, because, as I was saying, a reader has not spent like 250 pages really getting to know you. It's over really quick. And so it really helps to end with sort of a strong image that will sort of reverberate sort of as an after image. So like you wouldn't sort of like sum up and with some abstract thought at the end, like, oh, this is what it all meant. But if you can end on sort of something that's more metaphoric and image, And, you're not always going to be able to do that. And it's not always going to be called for. But when it can be, then that image will just stay with the reader.
You talk about mercurochrome, and I actually remember that from my childhood. My grandfather was a huge fan of mercurochrome, and I did not know what you say at the end, that it was banned for containing mercury, discovered to be toxic in 1998. But you kind of go through the use of it by your family and what it meant to you and what it looked like and the wounds, and it just had so much vastness within that. Now, when I think of flash nonfiction, I also think of micro memoir, but I realize that that's even a shorter structure. That's like up to 250 words, maybe.
Yeah, and this book is, I call it flash, but I mean, there are some essays that are just like one short paragraph. So there are
Yes.
some micros, and then there are a couple that are actually longer. I wrote them at the time, and I just thought thematically they fit. But for the most part, they're pretty much flash, but there are some micros in there.
How
Maybe
long did it take you to do this?
Well, I'll tell you, I started actually during the COVID lockdown, during the pandemic. Yes, it's true that, I needed a new project. I needed to sort of grow as a writer, and I wanted to try Flash. But then we had the pandemic, and, it's like nobody was going anywhere. You're sort of locked in your house. So I started then, but also as a way to kind of immerse myself in something so that I could not ignore everything that was going on, but distract myself in some way, because there's nothing I could do about COVID. I mean, I can't cure it. All I could do is try to keep myself safe. Maybe it took me about 3 years or so to write something like that.
Wow, wow. And I mean, 71 essays, and you broke it up into like three parts. So you had part one, strange entanglements, part two, how to and how not, and part three, grieflets. Can you explain your decisions for those?
Yeah, so strange entanglements are, and these are sort of loosely defined, but kind of these strange entanglements that I had with other people or other things, like that first essay you mentioned with that opening line is, I had this strange moment with this magician. That's what that first line that starts. My father sexually misloved me growing up, but that's another story. So the title of this essay is At the Apollo Theater. So I'm at this theater. It's not a movie. There's a real magician on stage, and I want to be part of his act, and I get to be part of his act. So it's just like this entanglement. It was just sort of this stranger, who I happened to encounter this time. And then how to and how not is sort of like kind of how to try to keep yourself safe or sane, and but also how I don't always. So like one of those essays is how to find a snow leopard in Georgia. So basically, I'm in rehab, and I don't want to be in rehab. One of my obsessions are snow leopards. So I had this fantasy about, oh, if I were a snow leopard and up in the Himalayas in all this icy terrain, there wouldn't be any men around, because I was in rehab to recover from a sex addiction. I was just feeling like, how do I recover? I don't even know how to recover. And maybe I should just go off and try and live with the snow leopards. I mean, it's sort of like speculative nonfiction and kind of a dream essay in some ways, just a fantasy of, I'll just go live with the snow leopards. Maybe I'll be a snow leopard, and then I don't have to worry about having this sex addiction. And then the third section is grieflets, and it's just these, there is grief, but then their grieflets are just smaller grief, which sort of fits the idea of flash essay. I think when you have like an essay collection, in order to help give it form and structure, it can help to have it in parts, so that you have some sense of sort of moving like through a narrative, even though they're all these short pieces.
I wanted to talk about another form. So, like for Snow on Cherries, you almost did that like a list form. There were 7 items. And to me, it was so powerful because it's like you go from innocence with cherries and the lipstick to the darkness that it reflected in different, the way you drank, and there was a cherry, and you felt dizzy, and the version of the man is the wolf and crab apple, like it's just very powerful. And then you had another list. It was like math, and it referred to your anorexia, right? So that was towards the end.
So there's this word.
Is that dyscalculia, Leah?
Yeah, I mean,
That,
it's a very difficult word. It's dyscalculia, Dyscalcalia. And basically, the word itself means somebody who is bad at math or numbers, which I am. I just can't
you
do
too.
them at all.
I
So
love the last sentence of that page. It says 375 friends lost along the way, but 5,000 friends on Facebook, which equals something.
yeah, so it's playing around with this. Like
Yeah.
it starts with one delusional father equals zero father, one depressed plus, and there's like the plus sign, emotionally deranged mother equals zero mother. So it's just a play kind of numbers, but doing the math all wrong. 6 years of elementary school equals 214 years of being a lost educational cause. So it's just sort of telling a story through a different form is what
Yeah.
that
It's
is.
really interesting. It's real. Like, I think that'd be a hard one for me to write because it's numbers and it's, putting it all together. Which was the hardest essay for you to write in here?
Actually, the one that was the hardest was the second one, Coming Attractions. So that essay revolves around three movies, Sundays and Sibel, The Story of Adele H., and The Lace Maker. They're sort of like 60s movies. They're all tragic and have tragic heroines. But I was obsessed with all three movies and I wanted to write about them, but you can't just like, here's a plot synopsis, right? That's going to be boring. So I had to write about them in such a way that I could really show how the narrator's life intersected with sort of the tragedy of these three heroines. And getting that right, how much plot summary does a reader need? Getting that sort of balance right, and really trying to show that intersection between me as narrator and these heroines. It was very difficult. I mean, this is like 20,000 drafts. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but I'm bad in math, so that's why I can say 20,000. But it was probably a good, 25 drafts or so, and it kept changing titles. So getting that just to stand together, because I have to assume that nobody else has seen these movies. I mean, that's what you have to sort of assume when you're writing something like that. And maybe somebody's seen one of them, but you have to sort of assume that nobody has. So how can I sort of convey kind of the tragedy of the movie without sort of overdoing it, and then show how I actually, even though these women all had such tragic lives and made really bad love choices as I was making, how can I do it in such a way so that it doesn't sound too like, why would she be obsessing about these heroines who had terrible lives? But yet I did identify with their lives. So how can I show that in such a way that a reader would understand that, oh, yeah, so Adele H. actually is the daughter of Victor Hugo. And she spent her life obsessed with this man who did not love her at all. And she followed him around the world. And he just would have nothing to do with her. And she ended up in a mental institution. So convincing a reader like that this was okay for me to be really obsessed with her, it was hard to do. So, if you read the essay, I either accomplished that or I didn't.
This has been such a great discussion, Sue. What do you want people to most take away from reading your book?
I think to be aware of those moments in time between our big life events, because we tend not to sort of overlook them. But there are many more of these small, increments of time, these miniature moments of loss or betrayal that really do add up. And so, as a writer or a reader, just to be aware of the meaning behind and have a context for these smaller moments of time in our lives, that not everything is just like this big sort of dramatic arc of a narrative. Just to find beauty or sadness or whatever it is in these sort of smaller moments.
I love that. Thank you so much, Sue. Selected Misdemeanors, everyone.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure. Follow me at EstelleSErasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.